Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Melva Covington. I am the founder and managing director of Agape Strategic Solutions of Maryland. I'm also the co-founder with Tamara Allen and managing director of People Empowering People for Inclusion Now, PEPIN. There's an exclamation point in the middle of our name, which connotes a sense of urgency. Thank you for joining us today for today's episode of Trial and Error, new focus on triple negative breast cancer research, reaching the right patients. Allow me to just present my background very quickly. It's varied. I'm a trained health outcomes scientist. I'm a strategic thinker and a patient advocate. I come with over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, primarily in health economics and outcomes research, but also in early intervention and in clinops. I've worked across the drug development pipeline, multiple therapeutic areas, but my strength is in building and synthesizing real world evidence designed to save lives and improve health outcomes. So for example, I've built cost effectiveness analysis. I've deployed global stakeholder engagement models. I've created playbooks for clinical operations. I stepped into the industry as an entrepreneur about 8 years ago to focus really on patient engagement, disruptive technologies, digital innovation in industry, startup, and in community-based interventions. So let's get started. This trial and error episode is a platform that's designed to create a space for open, honest conversation, practice-based dialogue about how early intervention in clinical trial ecosystems can really work. We look beyond what's on paper and seek to examine the lived real-world experience of people who participate in clinical research, and Black women in particular, Black women with triple-negative breast cancer in particular. So today's discussion will focus on new and emerging issues that pose persistent barriers and challenges in triple-negative breast cancer. We seek to have a practice-based conversation about clinical research design, operations, and real-world execution. Now, this is not a rehash of a lot of scientific data and a lot of detailed facts like concerning the mechanism of action. You can find that elsewhere. Some background will be provided for emphasis, but this session aims to inform leaders in industry, leaders in the pharmaceutical industry, clinical research organizations, academic sponsors, biotech innovators, regular affairs personnel about the potential gaps and opportunities that we want to really discuss. Most of all, we want to keep it real by elevating the experiential insights from patients and leaders like you who are engaged in ensuring that all stakeholders, particularly those that are hardest to reach, are represented in solutions for breast cancer research. So listen, there's a couple of ground rules. Just let me do this really quickly for you. There are three. The first is no sugarcoating. We'll discuss issues and scenarios that communicate the reality of populations that are at highest risk. The second, this is research and engagement in motion. We try to prioritize the experiences of researchers and corporate leaders who are actively engaged in study design, trial management, and engagement. And the third is cross-functional learning. We're in an ecosystem where stakeholders must align early and continuously to ensure that innovative therapies are produced. That's it. Everything else is on the table. So we encourage you to participate today. Please post your questions in the chat. There'll be a few polls that will be asked throughout the session and a survey at the end. Your insight is valuable and appreciated. Now, I'm excited today to be joined by my colleagues, Dr. Cheryl Beal Anderson and Ms. Stacy Bledsoe. The production leaders for this episode are Ms. Shartana Edwards and Tamara Allen. So we welcome you all. I'm passing it off to you, Dr. Anderson, who's our moderator. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Covington. You know, when I hear your background and your experiences that you bring, as well as your energy and passion to this topic, I am absolutely amazed and honored. You are one of the stellar pillars in this community around how is it that we engage in these sorts of topics that just need to have airtime. So you're a powerhouse, and I appreciate you. Again, as has been said, I'm Dr. Cheryl Bill Anderson. I'm founder and CEO of ACE Regulatory Affairs Consulting. Through my firm, I advise emerging biotech and pharma companies on regulatory strategies for development planning to optimize regulatory pathways to accelerate innovative therapies to patients. I have more and bring 25 years of curated experiences in and through pharma R&D for drugs, biologics, combination products, as well as generics, regulatory affairs. And that's where I earned my expertise. My experiences enable me to lead all categories of meetings with FDA, advisory committee meetings, planning for engaging global health authorities. I'm a former executive, corporate executive, and head of global regulatory affairs, drug safety, and quality organizations for new drug products and ensuring that on market products are in compliance. Clinical research and trials for the new products was ignited in me when I was a university faculty member and associate director of a 14-bed clinical research unit at a Texas state psychiatric hospital. Their patients, mostly schizophrenic and those with affective disorders, had serious diseases with limited treatment options and challenging to recruit, and compliance with GXP laid the foundation for the passion that I have to bring new products to the market. I still remember the faces of patients. One principle that guides my work is scientific curiosity that requires execution and excellence and high quality data for the purpose of market approval. The other principle is courage to take calculated risks and to take on difficult challenges, such as the one that we're considering today, because a business case has to be included as we talk about how to elevate underrepresented patients in clinical trials. Today, our goal is to identify actionable strategies that improve evidence and generation and ultimately patient outcomes. So let's get started. Our topic again, new focus on triple negative breast cancer research, reaching the right patients. Successful clinical trials do not happen by accident. They require intentional alignment across scientific strategy, clinical operations, regulatory planning, and all of the other functions that are critical to making and bringing new products. The alignment only occurs and should occur in the product first early phases. When alignment is absent, though, the consequences are costly. Think about the protocol amendments. Recruitment is delayed. A burden on clinical trial sites is increased. Scientific evidence gaps are created that limit our understanding of how therapies perform in populations most affected by the disease. Now, triple negative breast cancers, TNBC, accounts for approximately 10 to 15% of all diagnosed breast cancers. TNBC is a subtype of breast cancer that lacks estrogen receptors, progesterone receptors, and overexpression of human epidermal growth factor. TNBC is more aggressive and more difficult to treat, and the outcomes are worse. When we focus on Black women with TNBC, it's been observed that 40 to 60% higher risk of death is in place and being observed compared to white women, resulting in a twofold higher mortality rate. Black women with TNBC are twice as likely to be diagnosed at an earlier age, have higher grade tumors when diagnosed, indicating aggressive disease. Late stage or metastatic TNBC has the poorest survival outcome, only 14%. I want you to really resonate on these numbers and this data. There are biological and non-biological factors contributing to this health disparity. Research, public and private, is limited. Black women with TNBC continue to be underrepresented in clinical trials evaluating therapies of TNBC. So we trust that you will join us today to be an informed ambassador to generate high quality evidence through clinical research that really helps us to address the needs of Black women with TNBC. So I'd like to now allow our very special guest, Stacy Bledsoe. Stacy, please tell us a bit about yourself and then we can get started. Really appreciate the time.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl. Hello, everyone. My name is Stacy Bledsoe, and I serve as the head of clinical patient engagement and inclusion at Gilead Sciences. I'm a registered nurse with a master's degree in nursing and over 20 years of experience across clinical research, healthcare systems, patient outcomes, and pharmaceutical development. I am a nurse to my core, and I like to remind folks I did not leave who I was at the door of pharma when I came inside. The patient is at the center of all that I do. My work focuses on ensuring that clinical research is informed by the voices, experiences, and needs of the patients we serve. I believe that all patients should have access to the innovative drugs that pharma makes every day. Therefore, my focus includes advancing inclusive research practices through data driven decision making, strengthening community and site partnerships, and integrating patient engagement through the clinical development process. I have built and led this work at two major pharma companies, and I'm very proud of the work that I've done. Patient engagement and inclusive research are fundamental to good science. When we engage patients early, understand barriers to participation, and ensure research reflects the populations affected by the disease, we improve the relevance, quality, and impact of clinical trials. The views that you're going to hear today do not reflect the views of the organization for which I work, but they are in fact mine. I look forward to today's discussion and learning from the amazing panelists. Thank you, Dr. Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stacey. It's an honor to have you here. But let's get to it. Let's get to the big ideas and open up with this question. What drives value to support TNBC clinical research, new therapeutics, and what erodes that value? I'd like to start with Dr. Covington. Please give us your thoughts on this question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson. I first always like to start with some questions, especially as it relates to triple negative breast cancer. And the first question I start with is what drives the value of this type of cancer research? Specifically, what is the impact on the burden of illness for patients with triple negative breast cancer? And by burden, I mean not only the economic burden associated with the cost of care and access to care, but also the humanistic perspective. By humanistic burden or the human factor, I mean, what is it that relates to human dignity, self-actualization, authenticity, the meaning in the lives of patients? These factors help us to better understand and measure this type of cancer in research. So the truth of the matter is, we have limited knowledge on the impact on marginalized communities, but we'll wait for it. Why? Because they're not well represented in real-world studies or in investigational research. Patients with triple negative breast cancer have more negative emotional states. We know this. They also have worse health-related quality of life. Right? So we need to better understand the dynamics of these experiences, as well as those impacts on the hardest hit populations and patients who have this condition. The question is, what are we missing that will help us to better understand and address one of the most aggressive forms of breast cancer that disproportionately impacts Black women? That's a hard stop. So let's look at the gaps. What is it about the research science studies that we have to understand? Again, I always start with a question, and I always start with a hypothesis. This is critical to my thinking, especially around this condition. What does the evidence say about triple negative breast cancer in patients? Now, I'm not going to revisit all the stats that Dr. Anderson just talked about, but evidence and results of clinical research drive decisions about who will live and who will die. Triple negative breast cancer is an unrelenting, non-discriminatory killer. How can we apply new evidence from digital technologies and effective engagement approaches to reach patients and communities that are hardest to reach? But we have to look at it for what it is. Triple negative breast cancer is a glaring mark that impacts women who are at younger ages with less favorable outcomes. In fact, there are only two ways that you can treat it, either by chemotherapy or immunotherapy. That's it. As stated earlier, the rate of death is about 38% for Black women as compared to white women. And most white women have new cases of triple negative breast cancer in a particular year. So we must look more closely at how we identify, research, and support those who have the highest burden of triple negative breast cancer. So let's follow the money. Triple negative breast cancer is costly. It's a costly condition. It's costly to be diagnosed. It's costly to treat, and the quality of life is costly. The global estimates of triple negative breast cancer care, let me slow up, let me get my words out. The global cost of care is about $88 billion a year based on 2010 data. $88 billion a year, and that number is growing. The average yearly cost of care, the medical direct cost, that's the cost for drugs or the cost for visits, the cost for treatment, can range from $20,000 to up to $100,000 a year if you're in stage 1 to 3. If you go to stage 4, the costs go to $100,000 to $300,000 per year, and the costs continue to go up as cancer reoccurs, it progresses, or you have to change lines of therapy. Those are the direct costs. The indirect costs, that's the cost of transportation, the cost of lost wages, lifestyle, and other things that we call the social determinants of health, can range in between $207 to over $1,500 per patient per month. That's over $1,500 per patient per month. Wait, I'm not done. The humanistic burden that I talked about earlier, it's a bit more difficult to manage or to put a number on it, but it's still critical to this conversation. How can we better understand, should be the question, the impact of this humanistic burden on decision-making by families, friends, patients, and providers alike? All of these dimensions, I believe, disproportionately impact Black women with triple-negative breast cancer and their impact in the community and in the homes. But sadly to say, there are very few studies that look at this in detail and even fewer conversations that talk about it. I'll pass it back on to you, Dr. Anderson.
Wow. Dr. Covington, that is, it really does lay out the case for Black women and TNBC and additional study. I'd like to ask Stacy, Ms. Bledsoe, if she would just, again, opine on this same question.
Yeah, so engagement strategies that work. It's really simple, right? Engagement achieves the most significant impact in improving trust, awareness, trial design, and retention in clinical research. The most impactful engagement strategies in oncology research have been those that move beyond simply recruiting patients and instead focus on building relationships and incorporating patients' perspective throughout the research process. So, what drives the greatest value in TNBC clinical research is keeping patients at the center of the research process from the very beginning. Early engagement with patients, caregivers, and advocacy organizations help build trust, increase awareness, and improve participation in studies evaluating new therapies. Incorporating patients' perspective into trial design creates more patient-centered protocols, reduce unnecessary burdens, and improve recruitment and retention. Expanding access to community-based sites, flexible scheduling, transportation support. Dr. Melva talked about all of the disparities that exist and the additional burden. Sponsors have a responsibility to help offset some of those burdens. Decentralized approaches allow for patients to participate and help research better reflect the populations affected by TNBC. Now, we must be all transparent in saying that decentralized trial approaches come with their own, concern, but we must be aware of that when we implement those strategies. Inclusive clinical research strengthens the scientific validity of our data and ultimately helps improve our understanding of how new therapies work across diverse patient population. What erodes value is engaging patients too early in the process. After protocols are finalized and enrollment challenges have emerged. Patients understand this and they see this when they give us this feedback and they don't see that reflected in our trial protocol. Value is always diminished when trial designs create unnecessary barriers, when communication is overly complex, and when patient burden is not adequately considered. Failing to build trust within communities, overlooking the patient's experiences, or conducting research in populations that do not reflect the most affected by TNBC can limit participation, retention, and the ability to apply study designs across diverse populations. Ultimately, the greatest value comes from treating patients as partners in research. When we listen, engage early, and design studies around patient needs, we accelerate the development of meaningful new therapies and improve outcomes for all patients with TNBC.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bledsoe. This is just it's a lot of information that really is heavy. What I would like to offer in response to the question myself from a regulatory perspective, I think it is important just to remind us that the regulatory authorities are waiting for sponsors to bring substantial evidence, data, and innovation by which it can make a determination of safety and effectiveness and grant market approval. It is not interested in the commercial success of the products that are in development. However, it is important that they consider this thing as we talk about TNBC. One, race is generally not considered a biological target. That's just the facts. However, health disparity begs the question, what is happening with a particular subgroup when outcomes are different? A biological marker of the pathophys and the therapeutic effects would be necessary and certainly helpful. Quality data is also assumed. So if clinical data does not meaningfully reflect the population, the subgroup with higher risk, i.e. mortality, it prompts the question of the right patients being included. I reflect on the words of Dr. Paul Lieber, who was at FDA for many years, and he always had this mantra, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So again, we have to put in the work to understand TNBC. So the sponsor must be very clear on its target indication, the primary endpoint and secondary endpoints that are helpful to describe the data results. If Black women bear a disproportionate burden of TNBC mortality, sponsors have to decide to prospectively power studies to understand the treatment benefits in this population to seek an indication. That is not always going to be a business case that is going to win. If you've been in the drug development space, you understand all of the factors that go into this. I would propose, though, alternatively, sponsors also have the opportunity to obtain representative evidence in Black women and TNBC. It might be a differentiator of their product if described in the clinical study section of the labeling. So in there is value that sometimes has to offset the magnitude of the cost. So regulatory health authorities are not product developers. However, they are advisory to the limit. Regulators can be engaged in formal meetings during preclinical stage, and many of you I know are aware of these, but think of the other opportunities to engage with the regulators, special programs, applications for special designation like breakthrough designation, accelerated approval, public meetings. All of these are areas and opportunities. But I think it is important to note that in some cases, some sponsors will actually undervalue the benefits of such meetings and the time that it takes to actually collect and prepare for them. However, I would position that it is a necessary opportunity to engage with regulatory authorities on this topic of TNBC and all of the factors that have already been previously discussed. So to round it out, other elements that can erode value in clinical research of Black women for TNBC, clinical trial protocols that structurally exclude real-world patients. So those inclusion and exclusion criteria. Incorporates patient engagement when you don't do that. Also, deprioritizing national health research and funding. So with that, let's go to a poll. Before we go further, I want to hear directly from you. We have a live poll on the screen, and I would like for you to answer honestly based on what you see in your work or on your own experience. There's no right answers here, only yours. All right, so this question is, in your experience, when does representation planning for TNBC trial typically begin? Okay. So we'll be coming back to this observation as far as what you've given us through this particular survey. So thank you for contributing and taking the poll. So next, as we go deeper into this topic of including Black women in TNBC clinical trials, regulatory agencies in the United States are increasingly emphasizing representation and enrollment strategies. Regulators are increasingly recognizing that underrepresentation may affect the interpretation of safety and efficacy data. Sponsors should integrate representation planning early in development rather than attempting corrective measures after enrollment challenges occur. So representation and discussion should address site feasibility, endpoint selections, decentralized trial strategies, as has been mentioned, informed consent, readability, and participant burden. All of these are the things that need to be factored in a different way for Black women with TNBC. So strong strategies are best developed in cross-functional alignment within the regulatory affairs, clinical operations, medical affairs, and your clinical operations team. So, what should be the commitment, though, to promote representation in breast cancer research? That's the question that we need to address. And Stacey, would you address that, please?
So, thank you, Dr. Cheryl. So, our commitment to representation in breast cancer research must start with a fundamental mind shift. Representation is not a recruitment strategy, it is a scientific strategy. If we want research to truly improve the outcomes for all patients, representation must be intentionally built into the study design, site selection, and engagement plans from the very beginning. We need to move beyond asking patients to come to research and instead bring research closer to patients through community based sites, trusted healthcare providers, and innovative decentralized approaches, which I talked about earlier, understanding that some decentralized approaches can be an additional barrier. So that must be considered when you're looking at that tactic. Building trust requires sustained investment in communities long before a clinical trial begins. Trust is built through listening, transparency, and authentic partnerships, not a one time recruitment campaign. We also have an opportunity to leverage digital innovation and patient insights. Patients should not have to choose between participating in research and managing their daily responsibilities. We as sponsors have a responsibility to provide things such as transportation support, flexible scheduling, and patient navigation, as well as culturally relevant communications, which can help with participation and make it more meaningful for patients themselves. Success should not be measured solely by enrollment numbers. We should also evaluate retention, patient experiences, community trust, and whether participants feel respected, informed, and supported throughout their research journey. Most importantly, we must recognize that representation strengthens science. When clinical trials reflect the populations affected by breast cancer, we gain a more complete understanding of safety, efficacy, and patient outcomes. The future of breast cancer research is one where patients can see themselves reflected in clinical trials. Every community has a pathway to participate, and every voice helps shape the development of new therapies. In conclusion, I will say this is how we accelerate innovation, advance health equity, and ensure that the next generation of breast cancer treatments are informed by experience of all patients, not just some. Thank you, Dr. Cheryl, for your question.
And Stacey, you raised some points. I'm wondering if you could provide a couple of specific examples that relate either to site selection and or patient engagement. What does that really look like?
Triple negative breast cancer. We are not only getting it at a much higher rate, but we're dying from it at a much higher rate. And so there's a scientific and patient centered imperative when it comes to TNBC. Therefore, sponsors must begin to put actionable solutions in place. We can start with site selections, right? I know my colleagues who are listening will laugh because I like to tell them that this cannot be the only solution, but it is a powerful lever that sponsors have. Trials should extend beyond traditional academic medical centers and include community oncology practices that care for a larger number of Black patients. So, examples are bringing research opportunities to community cancer research allows patients to participate closer to their homes rather than traveling long distances. And I do see across the industry where our partners in industry are making concerted decisions and making strategic decisions on how to move into a more community site practice for care when doing clinical trials. Community engagement must be continuous and not transactional. I like to remind folks that engaging community stakeholders before a study launches helps build awareness and trust before recruitment even begins. Because we know that research shows that when you educate patients on their disease condition and clinical trials, they are more likely to participate. We must ensure that the patient voice directly informs our trial design. And the way to do this is through patient advisory boards. Patients often highlight challenges related to visit frequencies, time away from work, childcare responsibilities, and those are things that the sponsor can help address throughout the clinical trial experience. Sponsors' accountability should extend beyond enrollment numbers. Success should also be measured through retention, participant experiences, trust building, and long term community relationships. An example of this is it's important to understand that enrolling a patient in a trial is not enough if we don't retain them. We must ensure that the patient stays throughout the trial process and in order to ensure that our representation goals are met. I'll conclude with this. The future of inclusive research requires moving from a transactional enrollment model to a partnership model, where patients are engaged early, communities are valued, collaborators and trial designs reflect the realities of who we seek to serve. When we do this, we can improve representation, strengthen science, and ultimately deliver better outcomes for all patients with TNBC. Thank you, Dr. Cheryl.
Wow. Just want to go kudos, yes. And so, but when I think about this, sometimes in some companies, that there is a check the box kind of approach to doing these strategies to actually reach those difficult patients. And I think the one area that is different for us is also in the TNBC space is that, again, it is the mortality and the morbidity that is really high that should really drive this as a scientific endeavor. And so with that, I'm going to ask Dr. Covington, would you just go ahead and weigh in on what you see as the issues and how to just avoid checking the box?
Absolutely. I would start by saying three things: be courageous, be candid, and be clear. We are in an environment where people are hesitant to speak up and speak out early about the need for clinical research, especially in underrepresented communities. Being informed about the disparate outcomes are critical to us finding solutions, not only to access to care, but cost effectiveness. The humanistic burden that I talked about earlier is foundational to our understanding of how you get to better outcomes for all patients. Full stop. Having the courage, I believe, and the integrity, the willingness to speak out candidly and clearly demonstrates a good courage. We can do better. We must do better. Our creative voices, the programs, the opportunities. You mentioned it earlier, to be involved as partners, not only in small organizations or small businesses, but community-based sites, and bringing the respect and courtesy, not only of those teams, but the people with whom they serve is critically important as when we think about innovation and thinking outside of the box of what we're used to doing, who we're used to going to. So those kinds of, I think, issues compel us to do something different and do something new.
Well
Back
said,
to
Dr. Mack. Well said, well said. I would like to, though, just also just ask you to expound on the body of work that you and colleagues have been doing in this space. And so could you just add a little bit more color on some of the things that you talked about, the things that it requires to be courageous, to be candid, and be clear?
adding color is one of my favorite things. Absolutely, I will. You're speaking about clinical research. So my colleagues and I, Sharitha Serafis, Leslie Sam, and I recently published a study in DIA, the Therapeutic Innovation and Regulatory Science publication, TIRS. We examined the evidence as related to Black women with triple-negative breast cancer in clinical trials. What we did was we conducted a systematic evidence review of triple-negative breast cancer. We looked at the package inserts of key drugs that were on the market, and we spoke to Black women who had been diagnosed and treated. Briefly, what we found was that out of 30 studies published, 29 of them, or 97%, enrolled mostly white women. Only one study enrolled a subgroup of more than 10% Black women. One study. So we must ask ourselves, how can this be when the burden of developing triple negative breast cancer is 2 to 3 times higher or more likely in Black women, and they die at higher rates? Why doesn't our clinical research represent the measurement and the outcomes of this population? Now, we just said triple negative breast cancer makes up about 15% of all breast cancer cases. That's a lot. We should be able to consistently measure not only the performance indicators, but the quality indicators. So let's have just for a second, a couple of seconds, a closer look at the indicators, specifically as they relate to engagement, inclusion, and treatment satisfaction. As we then think about these indicators, many of our clinical research studies, as we talked about it earlier, they have health-related quality of life measures. Measures like the FACT-B or the EQ-5D or other measures that have alphabet names that I will not go into on this call. These are indicators that measure patient functionality. That is, issues like physical functioning, role functioning, emotional, social, cognitive functioning. They also measure things like symptoms, fatigue, pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, their appetite. These are routinely included not only as secondary endpoints, but also exploratory endpoints in most clinical trial research, especially research on breast cancer or cancer and breast cancer in particular. So we should want to measure these and not only measure, but monitor these things consistently for quality assurance and for benchmarking. Let me just give you just a couple of examples. We should want to know the number of patients contributing to a study designed in the last past 12 months through ad boards, as Stacy mentioned, workshops and feedback sessions. We should want to understand what are the screen failure rates or those who missed eligibility by race and ethnicity. This creates a check and a balance. We should want to understand the number of sites that report high satisfaction ratings with sponsors and CROs as they engage on site visits. This is critical. We should also want to understand the number of people who feel valued during the check-ins or during the processes, let's say in the last 6 months. We conducted a study about 2 years ago. It was a pulse survey. We asked people who had participated in clinical trials, how valued do you think this experience was? You participated in a clinical trial, you said that you understood everything, you went through all of the e-consents, all those things were in place. But when we went through the process, only 58% said that they found any kind of value whatsoever from the clinical research process. 58%. That means that 42% didn't. So what is it that we can do to make sure after people go through this process, they feel valued in the process? So listen, in sum, I'm just going to say that participant access for research into clinical trials should be viewed as an integral part of performance, quality, and measured outcomes. We should be able to build key indicators and service options for the highest risk population, not as an afterthought or as a rescue strategy. So these are things I think that are very, very important that we should keep into consideration as we think about designing and implementing research. I hand it back to you.
I can't have a little makeup time in some other place because this question is really pressing. And so when you think about the payer perspective on this level of data that you suggested be provided, what do you think is the impact of having that from a payer perspective in 30 seconds or less?
Is that the payers understand that they need to have medicines that will keep their population healthy so that the costs are contained, right? So they are saying, listen, if this product that costs millions of dollars a year potentially does not represent or not impact or is not effective on the population that I serve, then I'm not going to use it. So, we'll have to come up with some kind of arrangement to ensure that what you say is happening in your clinical trial is actually happening when it gets to my patient population, when I'm paying for it, when I'm managing their conditions. So the payers are pushing back even more so because the targeted therapeutics are becoming more sophisticated and more expensive. And so I think that it's imperative on both ends, early on and during the stages of real world implementation, that we make sure that these products work for all of the populations that need to be treated.
Thank you. Again, that digs right into the issue, reaching the right patient. So thank you for that response. The other question that we wanted to put on the table is how should sponsors define representative enrollment in a TNBC trial? Well, one quote that comes to mind is if this drug is approved tomorrow, do the trial participants reasonably reflect the patients who will receive it in the clinical practice? That just ties into everything that has been discussed before. And so when I think about this, then I just want to go over 5 principles, and the focus is going to be on the US in particular. One is first principle is evaluate the disease epidemiology, expected treatment use, biology, and health equity. It is amazing to see the level of information that is growing around the biological construct of these TNBC in Black women being different. Second principle is regulators would apply clinically meaningful expectations, right? So, one, who gets the disease, who experiences worse outcomes, who is likely to use the drug if approved, and who may respond differently due to the intrinsic or extrinsic factors. Third principle, define the target treatment population, disease incidence and prevalence, the mortality rates, the geographic variation, standard of care, all of those things that when you have that team of experts who are pulling this kind of justification in place. Black women have, again, a lower incidence overall for breast cancer, but Black women still disproportionately develop TNBC and mortality is substantially higher. Fourth principle, quantify the representation targets. Use the available epidemiology, intentionally oversample certain groups when the disease burden is higher, safety signals are suspected, differential efficacy and biological plausibility. And then think about also the labeling implications. Adequate enrollment of underrepresented population enables perhaps the potential subgroup analysis representation in efficacy sections, safety characterization, potential inclusion in labeling, assuming that the findings are clinically meaningful. And that becomes a differentiation. Why not differentiate your product? Now, most of this information that I said has been highlighted in the draft guidance on diversity action plans issued by the FDA. I know it sounds familiar, and it should, because that's where you would go to how to define the representation population. I want to also call out that with the changes in administration and with the availability and focus on these topics, that you will find this document in different spots rather than in the key landing pages of the FDA website. So I'd like to be sure that you are aware that the draft guidance document is found in the FDA dockets. It is there for comments as well as for the full review of the guidance itself. So find it there. Sometimes some things are hidden in plain sight. So the fifth principle, representation outside the United States is more complex and not defined the same. For a global development program in TNBC, a sponsor must prospectively evaluate Black women in the US, perhaps women in African ancestry in Africa and the Caribbean, Asian populations, and other suggestions are made to be considered. The overarching question is, can regulators and clinicians be confident that the observed benefit risk profile applies to the patients who ultimately receive the drug in their countries? Doesn't this sound familiar too? Ethnic factors and the acceptability of foreign clinical data. That also is found in ICH E5R1. So, with that being said, the diversity action plans are helping us to maneuver through the uncertainty of driving a shift to a more systemic and sustainable approach across our clinical development. Even if the diversity action plans, how they were originally envisioned, is not in play today and at this time, it still does not mean that the diversity action plan working within a sponsor company should not be done. The Fedora law still is in place and still requires this to still occur. But at the end of the day, requirements, expectations, we're saying that the scientific merit of this study in this area is life-saving. So let's get about that. So let's get poll number 2 going. We've covered a lot of ground today: health disparities, sponsor commitment, and regulatory expectations. Now I want just to turn the lens to ourselves in this webinar. And our second poll is now on your screen. And the question is for you to select as many as apply. Which barriers limit participation in TNBC clinical trials? Wow, this is thank you, thank you, thank you for your participation. You can continue to cast your opinions for the survey as we continue to go forward. Because at this point, we basically have made the case that there needs to be a new focus for sponsors in TNBC work, research for Black women. I'd like Dr. Kelvington and Ms. Bledsoe and myself just to give what is the key takeaway that each of us would like for you to lead with. Melba?
So my key takeaway is in communication and in scaling. And I think that Mr. Javante mentioned it also in the comments. We have to be able to scale this through effective communication and communication engagement, whether that's using digital technologies or reaching people where they are. But to be able to not only communicate, but communicate in a trusted way, I think is the most critical thing that we need to do and focus on as we think about new innovations and new technologies. I'll pass it off to you, Stacey.
Okay, so for me, first of all, let me thank Dr. Cheryl for talking about the diversity action plan. For us who live it every day, we like to reiterate that despite what the internal and sometimes even the external, and sometimes even your internal environment may change within your organization, most of us are still committed to diversity action plans in some form and making sure that our trials are representatives of the community that we serve, which leads me to my takeaway: community engagement. I want to make sure that we all understand that we have a role in this. Pharma and sponsors cannot do this alone. It will take all of us as a community to move this very important topic forward. And I will leave you with this, as many of our grandmothers might say: if the medicine is for us, then the evidence should include us. It is no longer about the right thing to do. It is about saving lives. And so I want to leave you all with the impression that it's going to take all of us. And so I challenge you to figure out what that looks like in your everyday work and role within your companies. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. In my case, sponsors should address matters related to defining representation despite perceived risks and meet with the regulatory health authorities. In many cases, sponsors can just be afraid, nervous, don't understand the feedback, is it binding, all of those things. But you have to think about it as we're talking about partnership and collaboration and building community. Likewise, a sponsor's relationship with the regulatory health authority is equally important and valuable. It's important to start early and bring them along with you, not just for the purpose of getting to what you believe, but also what you hear that they also will see is important to also be addressed. So this exchange of ideas around the sponsor's opinions and justification to achieve the necessary representation of people affected by the disease, it's informative and it's also helpful, and especially with health equity exists with high mobility and high mortality. Now, Stacey used a term, and I'll just say what, as my grandmother might say, baby, if that's who's getting sick and dying, that's who ought to be in the study. Now,
If I may just may jump in, I love that. I don't have a quote from my grandmama, but let me just say this. If I just may say one thing and follow up, right? If we are not designing the studies that can identify, recruit, and make sure that we're retaining, as it has been said, women, and particularly Black women who suffer from high rates of triple-negative breast cancer, then we're missing huge opportunities to produce the evidence that will leverage, again, these new technologies and these new approaches. We may be missing a great deal of insight and partnerships if we're not able to do it. And so listen, if we are not able to do this, I just have one final question to ask. I promise it's one final question. What factors make it okay to ignore or disregard these foundational metrics and approaches for inclusion, especially for Black women. So it's imperative that we do this throughout all of the ecosystem and not rely on convenience or expediency. So thank you very much. I was compelled just to say that last thought. So I appreciate you.
That has been the drive for this conversation today. And so let's now open up for a Q&A and hear questions and comments from you, the audience. Ms. Shatana Edwards, with a freshly minted master's in public health from Baylor College, Baylor University, is the program director at Agape Solutions. Ms. Edwards will moderate the next portion of the audience Q&A for maybe 5-6 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you all. And thank you again for our audience for joining us. So as of right now, we have more so comments than questions. I have a few questions for our panelists, but I want to start with one of the comments and I will put it on the screen. And I said, the dark history behind medical research on Black Americans has emotionally scared all people. We fear the past. So I would just love from each of your perspectives, maybe just 30 seconds, on how you not only react to this, but address this in the work that you do.
So I'll start. I acknowledge that we acknowledge that in pharma, and we understand that. I think what I've done at both the companies that I've worked for is I've made it a point to work with trusted partners in the community to educate patients, like I said earlier, not only on what a clinical trial is, what the things that are in place to protect them. I let them know that it is an option. And you don't have to stay once you enroll, right? You got to make sure people in the community understand what the opportunities are, what their rights are in clinical trials, but also help them to understand, the importance of it and what they are contributing to the larger community, right? And we know, and I said this before, research has shown, and this includes Black patients, when you educate patients on what a clinical trial is, make them aware, give them access, and then educate them on their disease conditions, they are more likely to participate. And so that's been my experience. It does take the entire community and us working with trusted partners in order to move it forward.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And what I will say is I think that Javante mentioned just before this, the book by Harriet Washington, Medical Apartheid. And so part of the way that I think we address the dark past is to acknowledge that it was indeed dark. So to have the conversations that say, I know that this happened, I know that it was hurtful, but then here is the value of where we're going right now or where we're going in the future. So I think that knowledge and information is powerful. And I'll kick it to Dr. Anderson and see if she has anything else to add to this. It's amazing.
So it gets down to relationships, trusted conversations, and advice. I remember just thinking about how just no matter where I am for a wellness, health fair, whatever, the topic always kinds of comes up as far as what is it and what happened in the past. And I think that that's the opportunity that everyone has to be able to speak to the truth, speak to the changes that have happened in the regulations, in laws, in informed consent process, all those kinds of things, and then just get it down to the core. Because at the end of the day, the community influences the participation, not only for themselves, but also for others. And so we have to be a part of again, just changing that. And the collective, has to be a part of this. It's not just the 3 or 4 of us on this screen. It is what we see as an industry that is important to provide this level of information to everyday patients with everyday questions.
Yeah, Dr. Show, can I just add one thing? And this is what I tell my families. The most innovative drugs on the market are in clinical trials, and we deserve access to that as a community. And so it's important that we educate our community on what their rights and privileges are around clinical trials, but understand that if we don't bring ourselves to the table, we are missing out on some of the most innovative therapies that exist in pharma today.
Thank you. Thank you all for responding to that comment. So we don't have any more questions, just a few more comments, again, expressing gratitude for having this discussion. So I want to thank our audience for all your participation, and then I will kick it back over to you, Dr. Anderson.
In closing, we appreciate each of you taking time from your day today to reflect on this topic. New focus in triple negative breast cancer, reaching the right patients. We will continue this important conversation, and we look forward to bringing also in the future a continuation of this topic, and we will bring the patients to you through our next programming. Our next episode will again include Black women with triple negative breast cancer, their experiences and their journey. And we anticipate that these will be powerful stories and an engaging conversation. I turn it over to Dr. Covington to close us out.
I'm sorry, my apologies. I was on mute. Thank you very much. I believe there's one other question. I'm not sure if we will be able to get to it right now, but I will just say this. Our goal today was to bring together professionals from across the industry and the research ecosystem to talk about triple negative breast cancer in an open and in a candid way. If you're designing a study, if you're leading a research program, if you're building an engagement infrastructure, if you are navigating a regulatory strategy, then we invite you to connect and be a part of these episodes in the future. You can connect with us through either our social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, StreamYard, or we're even going to be on Spotify. Our team welcomes your feedback. We ask that you please answer the QR code. You'll see it on the screen, and share this program with your friends. Have a great rest of today, and we look forward to future episodes and appreciate your timing. So thank you for both of the panelists and the host, Dr. Cheryl Beal Anderson and Ms. Stacy Bledsoe. You are just amazing. It's such an honor to be able to be on this show, on this episode with you. I honor you, my friends. I love your pearls too. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.